I need to start by saying that I didn't understand what was happening until it was already over. That's the part that still keeps me awake sometimes, even now, years later. The realization that, while I was going about my normal life, answering questions honestly, trying to be helpful, my sister was systematically building a narrative that would nearly destroy everything I'd worked for. And the worst part was how simple it was for her. How easily people believed her instead of me. My name is Claire and I'm 34 years old. I work as a compliance officer for a regional bank, which is relevant because my entire career is built on trust, verification, and maintaining ethical standards. It's ironic, really. I spent years learning how to spot financial irregularities, how to recognize patterns of deception, how to protect institutions from fraud. But I never thought to look for those same patterns in my own family. My sister Vanessa is 2 years younger than me. Growing up, we were close in the way that sisters often are when there is not much age difference. We shared a room until I left for college, shared clothes, shared friends. Our parents always made a point of treating us equally, or at least they tried to. Looking back now with the clarity that only comes from distance and pain, I can see the small moments where things weren't quite balanced. But at the time, I thought we were fine. I thought we loved each other. Vanessa went into marketing after college. She was good at it too. She had this natural ability to understand what people wanted to hear, how to frame things in the most appealing way possible. She could take a mediocre product and make it sound essential. She could take a mistake and reframe it as an opportunity. I admired that about her, actually. I've never been good at spinning things. I'm too focused on what actually happened rather than how it could be perceived. The incident that changed everything happened in the spring, almost 4 years ago now. Our mother had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer the previous winter. It was caught early, the prognosis was good, but it was still cancer, and it still meant surgery and radiation and all the fear that comes with those words. Mom and Dad live about 3 hours away from me, and Vanessa lived in the same city as them at the time. The plan was always that Vanessa would handle the day-to-day care coordination since she was close, and I would come down on weekends and help with whatever was needed. I took it seriously. I drove down every Friday after work, spent the weekends helping around the house, taking Mom to appointments when Vanessa couldn't, cooking meals to freeze for the week ahead. I used up most of my vacation days that spring. My manager was understanding, thankfully. Family medical leave protected some of it, but there were limits to what I could take without pay, and I was trying to be responsible about it. Mom had set up a joint account for medical expenses before her diagnosis. This was her idea, her way of maintaining some control over the situation. She added both Vanessa and me to the account so we could help manage bills, co-pays, prescription costs, all of that. It made sense at the time. Mom was dealing with treatment, Dad was working full-time and trying to manage everything at home, and having us handle the financial administrative side seemed like a reasonable way to help. The account had about $15,000 in it initially, funds my parents had saved specifically for medical emergencies. Over the months of treatment, that number went down, which was expected. Medical care is expensive even with insurance. There were co-pays for every appointment, prescription costs, special supplements the oncologist recommended, parking fees at the hospital, gas money for the drives to the treatment center in the next city over. Normal, explicable expenses. I never paid much attention to the specific transactions. Vanessa was handling most of the local stuff, and when I needed to use the account, I'd pay for something and then text her to let her know. She'd do the same. It seemed efficient. It seemed fine. The trouble started in June, after Mom had finished her radiation treatment. She was recovering well, getting her energy back, starting to feel more like herself. We were all relieved. The worst seemed to be over. Dad suggested we have a family dinner to celebrate, nothing fancy, just the 4 of us at their house. Mom wanted to cook, which felt like a good sign. She was ready to reclaim her kitchen, her routines, her normal life. I drove down that Friday evening, stopped to pick up flowers for Mom and a bottle of wine. I was in a good mood. The relief of knowing Mom was going to be okay was finally settling in, replacing the low-grade anxiety that had been my constant companion for months. Dinner was pleasant at first. We talked about Mom's follow-up appointment schedule, about Dad's plans to finally take a vacation once Mom was fully cleared, about my work. Vanessa talked about a new campaign she was working on for a local restaurant group. Normal family conversation. And then Dad said he wanted to discuss something. He had been reviewing the medical expense account, he said, just to get a sense of the total costs for their taxes to understand what they might be able to deduct. And he'd noticed some discrepancies. Charges that didn't quite make sense. Withdrawals that seemed larger than they should be for the types of expenses they were covering. I remember the exact feeling in my stomach when he said that. Not guilt, because I hadn't done anything wrong, but a kind of preemptive dread. The sense that something was about to go very wrong, even though I didn't understand what or how. Dad had printed out the bank statements. He spread them across the dinner table, moving aside plates and glasses to make room. He was being careful about it, diplomatic, but I could see he was uncomfortable. Mom was quiet, watching him with this expression I couldn't quite read. The discrepancies were all associated with my debit card, Dad explained. Over the course of Mom's treatment, there had been approximately $7,000 in charges that he couldn't match to medical expenses. They were coded as various things. Grocery stores, gas stations, a department store, several restaurant charges, even a hotel booking. And there were cash withdrawals too. Several of them, ranging from $200 to $500. I stared at the statements. I could see my card number, or the last 4 digits of it, listed next to these charges. But I didn't recognize them. I hadn't made those purchases. I certainly hadn't withdrawn that much cash. I lived 3 hours away. How could I have been making charges at grocery stores and gas stations in their city on weekdays when I was at work? There has to be a mistake, I said. I was still calm at this point, still assuming this was a clerical error, a mix-up with card numbers, something that would be easily explained. I didn't make these charges. Dad looked at me. Then he looked at Vanessa. And Vanessa did something I'll never forget. She looked down at her plate, and she got very quiet, and her eyes filled with tears. I didn't want to say anything, she said softly. I thought maybe Claire had a good reason. I didn't want to cause problems. I didn't understand what she meant. I looked between her and my parents, trying to figure out what was happening. You knew about this? Mom asked Vanessa, and her voice had this edge to it I'd rarely heard. I saw her using the card, Vanessa said, and now she was crying, actual tears running down her face. A few times when she was down visiting, at the grocery store, at Target, I thought maybe you'd asked her to pick things up, so I didn't think much of it at first, but then I noticed she was coming over less, and I thought, well, maybe she's busy, but now that I see all these charges. She trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the air. And I sat there, frozen, because I still didn't understand what was happening. I thought Vanessa would clarify, would say something that would make sense of this. Instead, she just kept crying quietly, and my parents both turned to look at me. Claire, Dad said. What's going on? Nothing is going on, I said, and I could hear my voice getting higher, defensive. I didn't make those charges. I don't understand what Vanessa is talking about. I've never used the card except for medical expenses. There has to be some kind of fraud, or someone got the card number, or something, but Vanessa saw you, Mom said quietly. No, she didn't, I said, looking at my sister. Vanessa, what are you talking about? You never saw me using that card for anything except medical stuff. Vanessa just shook her head, still crying. I didn't want to believe it either, she said. You're my sister. I thought there had to be an explanation. And that's when I realized what was happening. It came over me like cold water, this understanding that Vanessa was lying, that she was deliberately lying, and that my parents were believing her. I could see it in their faces, the way they were looking at me. Not with confusion anymore, but with disappointment. With hurt. This is insane, I said. I was standing now, though I don't remember getting up. I didn't do this, Vanessa. Why are you lying? What is happening right now? Nobody's lying, Dad said, and his voice was firm in a way that meant he'd already made up his mind. We just need to understand what happened to this money. I don't know what happened to it, because I didn't take it, I said. I was aware that I sounded desperate, angry, everything you are not supposed to sound like when you're trying to convince someone you're innocent. Check my bank account, check my credit cards, you'll see I haven't been spending money I haven't suddenly bought anything expensive or unusual. I can't prove I didn't do something, but you can look at everything I did do and see that this doesn't make sense. Mom was shaking her head slowly. $7,000, she said. That's not nothing, Claire. I know it's not nothing, I said. That's why I didn't take it. That's why I couldn't have taken it. Where would it even be? What would I have bought? but I could see it didn't matter. The evidence was there on the table, my card number on the statements, and Vanessa's tearful testimony that she'd seen me using the card. And I had nothing except my word against all of it. The dinner ended badly. I kept trying to explain, to defend myself, to make them understand that this was impossible. But every time I spoke, I could see them pulling further away from me. Finally, Dad said that he thought I should go home, that we all needed some time to process this, and that we'd need to figure out how to move forward. Move forward, I repeated. Dad, I didn't do anything. There's nothing to move forward from except figuring out what actually happened. We are all upset, he said. Let's take some time. I looked at Vanessa. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was still sitting at the table, looking down, occasionally wiping at her tears. I wanted to scream at her, to demand to know why she was doing this. But I also had this terrible, creeping fear that if I pushed too hard, if I became too emotional, it would only make things worse. That it would look like exactly what a guilty person would do. So I left. I drove the 3 hours back to my apartment in a kind of shock, my hand shaking on the steering wheel, my mind racing through everything that had just happened, trying to find the moment where I could have handled it differently, said something that would have made them believe me. I didn't sleep that night. I pulled up my own bank statements, my credit card statements, every financial record I had. I went through months of transactions, looking for anything unusual, anything that could explain $7,000. There was nothing. My spending was boring and consistent. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas, the occasional dinner out. I hadn't taken any trips, hadn't made any large purchases, hadn't done anything that would account for that kind of money. I printed everything. I don't know why exactly. Maybe I thought having physical proof would make it more real, more convincing. I spread it all out on my kitchen table and went through it with a highlighter, marking every single transaction from the past 6 months. Car payment, electric bill, Netflix subscription, grocery store, gas station near my apartment. Everything was exactly where it should be, exactly what you'd expect from someone living a normal, unremarkable life. The charges my father had shown me from the medical account were dated throughout March, April, and May. I pulled up my work calendar for those months. I could account for every weekday. I'd been at the office, in meetings, sending emails with timestamps. On the weekends when I'd driven down to help with Mom, I'd stayed at their house, used my own money for anything I needed. I had receipts from a gas station near my apartment, from restaurants in my city, from places that proved I was nowhere near my parents' town on most of those dates. Around 3 a.m, I realized what should have been obvious from the start. If I hadn't taken the money, then someone else had. And the only other person with access to that account was Vanessa. But accepting that meant accepting something much worse than simple theft. It meant accepting that my sister had deliberately framed me. That she'd looked my parents in the eye and lied, knowing exactly what it would do to me. That she'd cried those convincing tears while destroying my relationship with our family. I sat there at my kitchen table, surrounded by printouts and bank statements, and tried to understand why. We'd had our issues over the years, sure. Sibling rivalry, competition for our parents' attention, the usual dynamics of sisters close in age. But I'd never thought she actually hated me. I'd never imagined she was capable of something like this. The sun came up while I was still sitting there. I watched the light change in my apartment, watched my neat piles of evidence become visible in the morning glow, and I felt something shift inside me. Not acceptance exactly. More like the beginning of a long, slow grief. Because even if I could prove I was innocent, even if I could somehow make my parents believe me, the fact remained that my sister had done this to me. That she'd been willing to do this. And that knowledge changed everything. But that didn't make sense either, not at first. Vanessa had a good job. She made decent money. Why would she need to steal from an account that was meant for our mother's medical expenses? And more importantly, why would she frame me for it? I spent the entire weekend alone in my apartment, trying to understand. I called my parents multiple times, but they didn't answer. I texted them, explaining again that I hadn't taken the money, asking them to please just listen to me. Nothing. I texted Vanessa too. At first, I tried reasoning with her. I don't know what's going on, but this is crazy. You know I didn't do this. Please tell Mom and Dad the truth. When she didn't respond, I got angrier. Why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you? Still nothing. By Monday, I was panicking. I couldn't focus at work. I kept checking my phone, waiting for someone to call to say this had all been a misunderstanding, to ask me to come back so we could figure it out together. But there was nothing. I tried to function normally at the office. I answered emails, attended meetings, reviewed documents. But I felt like I was performing being myself, going through the motions of my life while my actual self was somewhere else, trapped in that dining room, watching my family's faces change as they stopped believing me. My coworker Sarah noticed. She asked if I was feeling okay, if something was wrong. I said I was fine, just tired. What else could I say? That my sister had framed me for theft and my parents believed her. It sounded insane even in my own head. Like something from a soap opera, not something that happened to real people with normal families. That Tuesday evening, I sat down and wrote an email to my parents. I spent 3 hours on it, writing and writing, trying to find the right words. I wanted to be calm, rational, convincing. I wanted to lay out the facts in a way they couldn't ignore. I started with the timeline. I listed every weekend I'd come down to help, every task I'd done, every moment I'd spent supporting Mom through her treatment. I wanted them to remember who I'd been before that dinner, the daughter who'd driven 6 hours round trip every week, who'd used vacation days to be there for appointments, who'd stocked their freezer with meals and organized Mom's medications, and sat with her during the worst of the treatment side effects. Then I moved to the evidence. I explained that I could provide my work calendar, my credit card statements, my bank records. I could prove where I'd been and what I'd spent money on during those months. I could show them that my financial life was completely normal, with no unexplained influx of cash or unusual purchases. I could demonstrate that it would have been physically impossible for me to make most of those charges. I acknowledged Vanessa's testimony, but gently suggested that maybe she'd been mistaken. Maybe she'd seen someone who looked like me, or maybe she'd confused dates, or maybe the stress of Mom's illness had affected her memory. I tried to give her an out, a way to walk back her accusation without admitting she'd lied. I ended by saying I loved them, that I understood this was confusing and upsetting, but that I needed them to please look at the actual evidence. Not just the charges, but everything else. The pattern of my life, my character, my history. Did they really believe I was capable of stealing from my sick mother? I read it through probably 20 times before I finally sent it. Then I waited. Dad responded 3 days later. His email was short. He said they appreciated me sending the information, but that they needed time to process everything. He said they weren't ready to talk yet, that this was all very painful for them. He didn't say he believed me. He didn't say he'd look at the evidence I'd offered. He just said they needed time. I tried calling. Mom's phone went straight to voicemail. Dad's did the same after 2 rings, which meant he was actively declining my calls. I left messages anyway. Calm ones at first. Just asking them to please call me back, please let me explain. Then more desperate ones. Begging them to listen, to give me a chance to prove my innocence. None of the calls were returned. I texted Vanessa every day that first week. The messages got progressively less rational. I started with gentle attempts at reasoning. I don't know what's happening, but we need to talk about this, please call me. When she didn't respond, I got more direct. I know I didn't take that money, please tell Mom and Dad the truth. Then angry. Why are you doing this? What did I ever do to you? And finally, desperately. Please, Vanessa, please, you're destroying my life. She never responded to any of them. Not once. It was like I'd ceased to exist. Mom, please, I said. Just listen to me. I can prove I didn't take that money. Let me show you my bank statements, my credit cards, everything. You'll see, Claire, she said, and her voice was so tired. Vanessa saw you using the card. She didn't want to tell us, but she saw you. Multiple times. She's lying, I said. I don't know why, but she's lying. I was never down there during the week. I was at work. You can check with my office. They can confirm I was there. She said she saw you on weekends, Mom said. I'd check the charges, I said. Look at the dates. I'll show you where I was, what I was doing. This doesn't make any sense. I'm tired, Claire, Mom said. I just finished cancer treatment. I can't deal with this right now, Mom. I'm your daughter, I said, and I was crying now. I would never steal from you. You have to know that. There was a long silence. Then she said, I need some time, and she hung up. Over the next few weeks, I tried everything I could think of. I wrote a long email to my father, laying out a timeline of exactly where I'd been and what I'd been doing during the period when those charges were made. I attached my work calendar, my credit card statements, receipts from places I'd actually been. I explained that if I'd really stolen $7,000, there would be evidence of it somewhere in my life, and there wasn't. He responded briefly. He said they appreciated the information, but that they still needed time to process everything. I looked into the possibility of proving fraud on the account. I called the bank, explained that I believed someone had been making unauthorized charges using my card number. The customer service representative was sympathetic but explained that since it was a joint account and the other person with access was claiming they'd seen me make the purchases, there wasn't much they could investigate. It wasn't fraud in the legal sense. It was a family dispute. I contacted a lawyer just for a consultation. I explained the situation, asked if there was any legal avenue for proving my innocence. She listened patiently, then gently told me that unless my parents were pressing charges or there was some concrete legal action being taken against me, there wasn't really anything to litigate. I couldn't sue my family for not believing me. I couldn't force them to look at evidence they didn't want to see. This is an awful situation, she said. But unfortunately, people are allowed to believe whatever they want about you, even if it's wrong. Unless they're defaming you publicly or causing you tangible harm beyond emotional distress, there's no legal remedy. I considered hiring a private investigator. Maybe they could trace the actual locations where the charges were made, pull surveillance footage from the stores, prove that it wasn't me making these purchases. But when I looked into the costs, I realized I couldn't afford it. Not for something that might not even yield useful results. Security footage gets deleted after 30 days in most places. The charges had been made months ago. And even if I could prove it wasn't me in those stores, my family might just say that I'd found some way around that I'd had someone else make the purchases for me. There was always another explanation that would let them keep believing I was guilty. I became obsessive about documentation. I kept every receipt, logged every mile on my car, maintained detailed records of everywhere I went and everything I did. It was irrational, I knew that. The charges had already been made, the accusation already leveled. But I felt like if I could just build a comprehensive enough picture of my life, eventually they'd have to see that their narrative didn't fit reality. At work, I found myself being extra careful about everything. I double-checked every compliance report, every audit, every transaction I reviewed. I was terrified that I'd make some small mistake and it would confirm my belief that I was careless, dishonest, someone who couldn't be trusted. My manager noticed and praised my attention to detail, never knowing that it came from a place of deep paranoia rather than professional dedication. I stopped sleeping well. I'd lie awake replaying that dinner over and over, looking for the moment where I could have said something different, something that would have changed the outcome. I'd think about Vanessa's tears and wonder how she'd done it. Had she practiced beforehand? Had she planned exactly what she would say and how she would say it? Or had it been improvised, a desperate defense that she'd somehow pulled off? And I thought about my parents trying to understand their perspective. I knew they loved me, or at least they had loved me. But I also knew that people believe what makes sense to them, what fits with their understanding of the world. And the story Vanessa had told made sense in a horrible sort of way. The charges were real, they had my card number attached to them, and she claimed to witness me making purchases. What were my parents supposed to think? But then again, I was their daughter. Didn't that count for something? Didn't 32 years of being their reliable, honest, responsible child earn me at least the benefit of the doubt? Didn't they know me well enough to question whether I was capable of something like this? Apparently not. Or maybe they did know me and that was the problem. Maybe I'd always seemed too perfect, too controlled, and they'd been waiting for the moment when the mask would slip. Maybe Vanessa's accusation confirmed something they'd always suspected, some hidden flaw they'd been looking for. I started paying attention to other families, watching the way they interacted, trying to understand what made relationships resilient versus fragile. I noticed parents who defended their children fiercely even when those children had actually done wrong things. I saw families who fought and forgave, who worked through conflicts instead of severing ties. And I wondered what made my family different. What had I done, or failed to do, that made me so easy to cut off? Mostly, I went through my days in a fog. I went to work, I did my job, I came home. Friends asked if I was okay, and I didn't know how to explain what had happened. How do you tell people that your sister framed you for theft and your parents believed her? It sounded unhinged. It sounded like the kind of thing someone who was actually guilty would say. About a month after the dinner, Anessa sent me a text. It was brief. "I think you should get some help, maybe talk to someone about why you did this. I'm worried about you." I stared at that text for a long time. The calculated cruelty of it. The way she was doubling down, creating a narrative where I was not just a thief but someone in denial, someone who needed psychological help. And she'd sent it as a text, which meant there was a record of her expressing concern for me, evidence of her being the caring sister. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Time passed. I kept showing up for work, kept paying my bills, kept living my life. But there was this hollow feeling in the center of everything. I'd lost my family. Not to death or distance, but to a lie that I couldn't disprove. I thought about that a lot. The impossibility of proving a negative. How do you prove you didn't do something when someone else says they saw you do it? How do you fight against someone else's testimony when all you have is your own word? The thing that haunted me most was trying to understand why. Vanessa and I had our issues growing up, sure. She'd always been a little competitive, a little sensitive about comparisons between us. But I'd never thought it was serious. I'd never thought she hated me enough to do something like this. It took me a long time to piece together what I think actually happened. I can't prove it even now. But based on the dates of the charges, based on what I know about Vanessa's life at the time, based on small comments and observations I'd made but not really registered, I've developed a theory. Vanessa's job, the one she'd been so proud of, hadn't been going as well as she'd let on. I found this out later, much later, from a mutual acquaintance who mentioned in passing that Vanessa had been let go from her marketing position that spring. But she'd never told our parents. She kept pretending she was going to work, kept talking about campaigns and clients, kept maintaining the fiction that everything was fine. The timeline matches. The charges started in March, right around when I think she must have lost her job. Small at first, probably just enough to cover her immediate expenses, make sure she could still pay her rent and her car payment. But it escalated. Grocery store charges that were probably her feeding herself. Gas station charges because she still needed to drive around to maintain appearances. Restaurant charges because she had to meet friends somewhere, had to keep acting like everything was normal. And the cash withdrawals, those were probably for everything else. The small expenses that add up. The things you need day-to-day money for when your bank account is empty. I remember now, during those months, Vanessa being particularly attentive to Mom. She was always there, always involved, always offering to handle errands and expenses. At the time, I thought she was being a good daughter, stepping up during a crisis. Now I realize she was probably positioning herself, making sure she was the one who had access to the account, the one who could use the card without anyone questioning it. She planned to pay it back, I think. Or at least she told herself she'd pay it back. That's what people always say when they borrow money they're not supposed to borrow. They tell themselves it's temporary, that it's not really stealing because they're going to replace it. They tell themselves that the ends justify the means, that they're in a desperate situation and this is the only way through. I can almost understand that part. Losing your job is terrifying, especially when you've built your identity around being successful. And during a family crisis, when everyone's attention is focused on something else, it probably felt like the perfect opportunity. Who would notice a few extra charges here and there when they were already paying for so many medical expenses? But then Dad started looking at the account. And Vanessa realized she'd taken too much, that it was too obvious, that there was no way to quietly replace it before anyone noticed. So she had to make a choice. Admit what she'd done and face the consequences, or blame someone else. She chose me. And I understand that decision too, in a horrible way. Not excuse it, not forgive it, but understand it. Because once she'd made the initial choice to take the money, everything after that was just trying to avoid the consequences. And when you're that deep into a lie, when you've already crossed so many lines, it becomes easier to cross one more. Especially when that line is sacrificing someone else to save yourself. I was the obvious choice. I had access to the account too. I lived far enough away that my presence in their city would be irregular and hard to track. I came down on weekends so she could claim to have seen me at stores on those days without having to prove specific times or dates. And most importantly, if she said she'd seen me using the card, who was going to contradict her? My parents weren't there when I went shopping. There were no witnesses to something I hadn't done. The other thing that made it work was more subtle, and I think Vanessa understood this instinctively. I'd always been the responsible one. The one with a steady job, the one who followed rules, the one who was maybe a little boring because I was so focused on doing everything right. And sometimes, when someone seems too perfect, people almost want to believe they've done something wrong. Like it confirms that nobody's really that good, that everyone has secrets, that the person who seems most put together is actually hiding the most. Vanessa understood that. She understood that one tearful testimony from her, paired with the evidence of the charges, would be enough. Because nobody wants to believe their daughter is a calculating liar, but everyone can believe that their other daughter, the one who always seemed to have it together, might have a hidden side. A secret spending problem, a resentment about being the one who had to drive 3 hours every weekend, some darkness hiding beneath the surface. And the tears were a perfect touch. They made her seem vulnerable, reluctant, like she was torn between loyalty to her sister and loyalty to the truth. They made her look like the victim too, someone who'd been put in an impossible position, forced to betray her sister for the sake of honesty. It was masterful, really. I don't think she planned it in advance, not all of it. I think she probably started taking the money with some vague idea of paying it back, never imagining she'd get caught. But when she did get caught, when Dad pulled out those statements, she had maybe 10 seconds to make a decision. And in those 10 seconds, she chose to protect herself by destroying me. The thing I can't stop thinking about is how easily it worked. How simple it was for her to completely alter my parents' perception of me with just a few sentences and some strategic crying. 32 years of being their daughter, of building trust and demonstrating my character, and it all evaporated in one evening because Vanessa said she saw me do something I didn't do. What does that say about the nature of trust? About the fragility of relationships? About how well we really know the people we think we know? I've read about false accusations, about people who have been wrongly convicted of crimes, about the psychology of why people believe lies. There's something called confirmation bias, where people interpret evidence in ways that confirm their existing beliefs. And once someone forms a belief, even if it's based on false information, they tend to double down on it rather than admit they were wrong. That's what happened with my parents, I think. Vanessa's accusation gave them a narrative, and once they accepted that narrative, everything else got filtered through it. My denials looked like the desperate lies of someone caught. My evidence looked like an attempt to cover my tracks. My emotions looked like guilt rather than genuine hurt and confusion. They decided I was guilty, and after that, nothing I said or did could change their minds because they interpreted everything I said or did through the lens of that guilt. 3 months after the dinner, I got a call from my father. It was brief and awkward. He said that he and Mom had been talking, and they thought it would be best if I didn't come to family gatherings for a while. That things were still too raw, too painful. That maybe eventually we could work through this, but not yet. Work through what? I asked. I didn't do anything wrong, Claire, he said, and he sounded exhausted. Please, let's not do this again. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm telling you the truth, the same truth I've been telling you since June. He sighed. We need some space, he said. Can you give us that? What was I supposed to say? No. Demand they include me in family events where nobody wanted me there. Fine, I said. Take your space. That was the last real conversation I had with my father for 2 years. I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving that year. I spent it alone in my apartment, eating Chinese takeout and trying not to think about the fact that Vanessa was probably sitting at the table with my parents playing the role of the devoted daughter while I was cast as the thief who'd stolen from her sick mother. Christmas was the same. I got a card from my mother, a generic one with a printed message and both their signatures. Nothing personal, nothing acknowledging what had happened, just the card that said season's greetings like I was a distant acquaintance instead of their daughter. I sent them cards too, and gifts. I didn't know what else to do. I picked things I thought they'd like, wrote messages saying I loved them, I missed them, I hoped they were well. I never mentioned the money or the accusation. I thought maybe if I just kept being their daughter, kept reaching out, eventually they'd realize that someone who was really guilty wouldn't keep trying like this. But maybe that was naive. Maybe it just looked like I was trying to manipulate them, to wear them down with persistence. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into it, took on extra projects, volunteered for things I normally would have avoided. My manager noticed and appreciated it, though she also gently suggested I take some time off, maybe talk to someone. I think she thought I was going through a breakup or something, some normal kind of life crisis that would eventually resolve itself. I did start seeing a therapist, actually. Not because I thought I'd done anything wrong, but because I needed someone to talk to who wasn't involved, who could help me process what had happened. I found someone who specialized in family trauma, a woman named Dr. Patterson who had kind eyes and an office that smelled like lavender. The first few sessions were just me explaining the situation, going through every detail, trying to make her understand that I wasn't in denial, that I really was innocent. I was so afraid she wouldn't believe me, that I'd lost my family because of a lie, and now I'd lose my therapist too if she thought I was lying to her. But she listened patiently. She asked clarifying questions. She took notes. And at the end of that third session, when I finally stopped talking and looked at her with this desperate need for validation, she said, "I believe you." I cried. Just those 3 words, and I cried like something had broken open inside me. Because I'd needed so desperately for someone, anyone, to hear my story and not doubt me. "The question isn't whether you did this," Dr. Patterson said once I'd calmed down. "The question is how you're going to live with what's been done to you." We spent months unpacking that. The grief of losing my family. The rage at Vanessa. The profound sense of injustice that came from being punished for something I hadn't done. The strange, disorienting feeling of having your reality completely denied by the people who were supposed to know you best. "It's a kind of gaslighting," Dr. Patterson explained during one session. "Not in the intentional, manipulative sense that we usually mean, but the effect is the same. You know your truth, you have evidence of your truth, and yet the people around you are telling you that your truth isn't real. That's deeply destabilizing." She was right. I'd started doubting everything. Not whether I'd taken the money, I knew I hadn't. But I doubted my memories of my relationship with Vanessa, my understanding of my parents, my ability to judge people's characters. If I'd been so wrong about my family, what else was I wrong about? Who else might betray me? "Trust is like a muscle," Dr. Patterson said. "When it's injured, you have to rebuild it slowly, and yes, you're going to be more cautious now, but that's not weakness, that's learning." We talked about forgiveness too. Whether I needed to forgive my family in order to move on. Dr. Patterson was careful about this, never pushing me toward forgiveness but also helping me understand what it might mean and what it might not. "Forgiveness doesn't mean what happened was okay," she said. "It doesn't mean you have to reconcile with them or let them back into your life. Forgiveness, if you choose it, is really about releasing the constant anger so it doesn't consume you. It's for you, not for them." I wasn't ready for that, not then. I was still too angry, too hurt. The wound was too fresh. "That's okay," she said. "You don't have to forgive them. You don't have to forgive anyone. What you need to do is figure out how to live a full life despite what they did to you." That became our focus. Not fixing what had happened or finding a way back to my family, but building a life that could sustain me without them. It was harder than it sounds. So much of my identity had been wrapped up in being someone's daughter, someone's sister. I had to figure out who I was when those roles were stripped away. We worked on it systematically. Dr. Patterson had me make lists of things I liked to do, things that brought me joy independent of anyone else. We talked about friendships and how to build deeper connections with people who weren't family. We discussed my career and whether I was pursuing it because I wanted to or because I thought I should. She also helped me process the specific trauma of false accusation. "There's something uniquely painful about being blamed for something you didn't do," she explained. "It's not just the injustice of it, though that's bad enough. It's the fundamental violation of being misunderstood at such a basic level. When someone accuses you of something you did do, you can at least understand their anger," she said. "You can apologize, make amends, try to repair the relationship, but when you're accused of something you didn't do, there's nowhere to stand. You can't fix it because you didn't break it, and the other person's anger feels both overwhelming and completely misdirected." That captured it exactly. The helplessness of it. The feeling of being trapped in someone else's narrative with no way out. But as the months went on and the silence from my parents continued, I had to start building a life that didn't include them. I had to figure out who I was without the identity of being someone's daughter, someone's sister. I had to learn to introduce myself to new people without mentioning my family, because if I did mention them, eventually they'd ask questions I didn't want to answer. The hardest part was the holidays. That first Thanksgiving was approaching, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I wasn't going to be invited. I waited for the phone call that didn't come, checked my email obsessively for an invitation that never arrived. Part of me thought surely they wouldn't actually exclude me from Thanksgiving. Surely there was a limit to this punishment. But Thanksgiving came and went, and there was no call. I spent it alone in my apartment, trying to convince myself that it was fine, that it was just another Thursday. I ordered Chinese food and watched movies and told myself I was being independent, taking control of my own narrative. But the truth was I felt completely hollowed out. I imagined them all sitting around the table without me. Mom and Dad at either end, Vanessa in her usual spot. My chair empty, or worse, not empty. Maybe they'd invited someone else to fill the space. Maybe they'd just rearranged the table so there was no gap where I used to sit. Did they say grace and skip over my name? Did anyone mention me at all? Or had I been so thoroughly erased that they could have an entire Thanksgiving dinner without anyone even noticing I wasn't there? That was the night I came closest to actually calling them and confessing to something I hadn't done. Not because I wanted to lie, but because I thought maybe if I just gave them what they wanted, I could have my family back. I could sit at that table next year. I could stop being so alone. I actually picked up my phone and started to dial. My finger hovered over my mother's contact, and I had the words ready in my head. Mom, you're right. I did it. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Can we please just move past this? But I couldn't do it. I couldn't force those words out, even knowing they might end this nightmare. Because it wasn't true. And if I said it was true, I'd be collaborating in my own false conviction. I'd be giving Vanessa exactly what she wanted, and I'd never be able to take it back. So I put the phone down and cried instead. Christmas was somehow worse. At least with Thanksgiving, I could pretend it was just a dinner, just a meal. But Christmas had always been special in our family. We had traditions, rituals, specific ways of doing things that had been the same since I was a child. Mom's cinnamon rolls on Christmas morning. Dad's terrible singing of carols. The way we'd take turns opening presents, savoring each one instead of tearing through them all at once. I got a card from my parents. A generic one with a printed message and both their signatures. Wishing you a joyful holiday season and a happy new year. Like I was a coworker or a distant acquaintance, not their daughter. I stared at that card for a long time. There was nothing personal in it, nothing that acknowledged our relationship or what had happened. It was polite, neutral, completely empty of meaning. And somehow that felt worse than if they'd sent nothing at all. Because at least nothing would have been honest. This card was performative, a gesture that looked like connection, but actually confirmed how completely disconnected we become. I started dating someone that spring, a man I met through work connections. His name was David, and he was kind and patient, and for a few months I thought maybe this could be something real. He was an attorney, which should have made me more cautious about telling him, but instead I thought maybe his legal training would help him to see the situation clearly, understand why I couldn't have done what I was accused of. We'd been dating for 3 months when he asked about my family. It was a normal question, the kind that comes up naturally as relationships deepen. We were having dinner at his apartment, and he'd been telling me about his own family, his parents who still lived in the house he grew up in, his brother who'd just gotten engaged. What about your family? He asked. You never really talk about them. I could have lied. I could have said something big about being distant, about not being close. But I wanted to be honest with him. I wanted to believe that someone I was building a relationship with could hear my story and believe me, could see me clearly enough to know I was telling the truth. So I told him everything. The dinner, the accusation, Vanessa's tears, my parents' silence. I tried to be calm and factual, to present it as clearly as possible. I showed him some of my financial records, the evidence I'd gathered but never been able to use effectively. He listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, seemed genuinely sympathetic. And at the end of the conversation, he held my hand and said, "That sounds really difficult. I'm sorry you're going through that." But over the next few weeks, I noticed a shift. He started asking questions that felt different, probing in a way they hadn't before. Are you absolutely sure you didn't maybe use the card once or twice and just forgot? Could there be some explanation you're not seeing? Have you considered that maybe your memory of events isn't quite accurate? Each question felt like a small betrayal. I told him my truth, shown him my evidence, and he was still looking for ways I might be wrong. or worse, lying. One evening, about a month after I had told him, we were at my apartment watching a movie. During a scene about financial fraud, he said casually, I was reading about this psychological phenomenon where people genuinely believe their own lies. They tell themselves a story so many times that it becomes true in their memory. I paused the movie. Are you saying you think I'm lying to myself about what happened? He backpedaled immediately. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's an interesting phenomenon. People are complicated. But I knew what he was really saying. He looked at my situation and decided that the most likely explanation was that I'd taken the money and convinced myself I hadn't. That I was either lying to him or lying to myself, but either way, I wasn't trustworthy. We broke up 2 weeks later. He said it wasn't about the family situation, that we just wanted different things. But I knew better. He looked at me and wondered if I was the kind of person who could steal from their sick mother and then lie about it. And once that doubt was there, everything else was tainted. After David, I was more careful. I dated casually, kept things superficial. If someone asked about my family, I said we weren't close and changed the subject. It was safer that way. Less honest, but safer. I did try again about a year later. Met a woman named Jessica at a friend's party. She was warm and funny and made me feel comfortable enough to eventually tell her the truth about my family's situation. Unlike David, she didn't doubt me. She got angry on my behalf. Called Vanessa names I wouldn't repeat, suggested I sue everyone involved. You can't let them get away with this, she said, her eyes fierce with righteous anger. There has to be something you can do. But her anger, as validating as it was, also exhausted me. She wanted me to fight back, to take action, to somehow force my family to see the truth. She didn't understand that I'd already tried that I'd exhausted every option I could think of. And I didn't have the energy to keep fighting a battle I couldn't win. We dated for 6 months, and they were good months in a lot of ways. But eventually, the weight of my situation became too much for the relationship to bear. Jessica wanted to fix things I couldn't fix. She wanted to save me from something I was trying to save myself from. And when she realized I wasn't going to become the warrior she wanted me to be, when she saw that I was instead working on acceptance and building a life without my family, she lost interest. I just don't understand how you can be so calm about this, she said during what turned out to be our last real conversation. If someone did this to me, I'd never stop fighting. Maybe that's because it didn't happen to you, I said, and I was surprised by the bitterness in my voice. Fighting feels good when you're on the outside looking in, but when you're living it, when you've tried everything and nothing works, eventually you have to make a choice about how you're going to spend your energy. We broke up shortly after that. The first-year anniversary of the dinner came and went. I marked it privately, noticed the date on my calendar, and felt the weight of an entire year of being cut off from my family. I'd imagined in the early days that surely this wouldn't last a year. That someone would realize the truth, or that at minimum my parents would decide that the year of punishment was enough, whether I'd actually done it or not. But there was nothing. No calls, no emails, no indication that they were softening. Anissa, meanwhile, seemed to be doing fine. I made the mistake of looking at her social media occasionally. She'd gotten a new job, a better one according to her posts. She looked happy and successful and not at all like someone carrying the weight of a massive lie. There were pictures of her with our parents, the 3 of them at restaurants, at events, living their lives without me. And in the captions, nothing. No acknowledgement that anyone was missing. I'd been erased. I went through phases of intense anger. I'd imagined confronting Vanessa, forcing her to admit what she'd done. I'd script out conversations in my head where I was eloquent and devastating, and she finally broke down and confessed. But I knew those were fantasies. If she'd been willing to tell the truth, she would have done it already. And the longer she maintained the lie, the harder it would be for her to take it back. Too much time had passed. Too much had been invested in the false narrative. I thought about writing an email to my parents, laying everything out one more time, demanding they actually investigate instead of just accepting Vanessa's word. But what would that accomplish? They'd already decided. More evidence from me would just look like more desperate attempts to avoid responsibility. Around the 18-month mark, something shifted in me. I think it was finally accepting what my therapist had been telling me all along. I couldn't control what my family believed. I couldn't make them see the truth if they didn't want to. And continuing to fight against their perception of me was only hurting me more. So I made a decision. I decided to build a life that didn't include them. Not out of anger, though there was plenty of that, but out of simple necessity. I couldn't keep living in this liminal space, waiting for them to take me back, organizing my life around their potential forgiveness. I had to move forward. I started small. I booked a vacation by myself, something I'd always wanted to do but never had. I went to Iceland for a week, spent my days hiking and seeing waterfalls and sitting in hot springs. It was lonely sometimes, being solo while surrounded by couples and families. But it was also freeing. Nobody there knew about my situation. I was just another tourist, uncomplicated and accused. When I got back, I started saying yes to more social invitations. I'd been isolating myself without really realizing it, turning down happy hours and dinner parties because I didn't want to be around happy families or answer questions about my own. But I forced myself to engage more, to build friendships that weren't connected to my family at all. I got a promotion at work. It was something I'd been working toward for years, and when it came through, I felt this complicated mix of pride and sadness. Pride because I'd earned it, sadness because there was nobody to call and share the news with. In another life, in the version where Vanessa hadn't lied and my parents had believed me, I would have called them immediately. My mom would have been so proud. My dad would have taken me out to dinner to celebrate. Instead, I told my friends. I posted about it professionally on LinkedIn. I bought myself a nice dinner and a bottle of wine and tried to celebrate alone. It felt hollow, but I did it anyway. The 2-year anniversary passed more quietly than the first. I noted it, acknowledged to myself that it had now been 2 full years since I'd had a real conversation with my parents, since I'd been part of my family. But I didn't dwell on it the way I had before. The grief was still there, but it had dulled into something more manageable. A constant ache rather than an acute pain. I dated someone new, a woman this time. I'd always been attracted to women, but had never seriously explored it, maybe because I'd been too focused on being the good daughter in a family that was casually conservative about these things. But since I'd already lost my family, there was a certain freedom in finally pursuing what I actually wanted. What did I have left to lose? Her name was Rachel, and I met her at a professional networking event. She worked in graphic design, had this creative energy that I found both intimidating and attractive. She was funny and sharp and didn't push me to talk about things I wasn't ready to discuss. We dated for 2 months before the family question came up, and by then I'd learned to be strategic about how I framed it. I'm not in contact with my family, I said simply. We had a falling out a couple years ago. Most people would have let it go at that, respected the boundary I was clearly setting. But Rachel just looked at me for a moment and said, "That sounds painful. Do you want to talk about it?" The way she asked, without judgment or prying curiosity, made me feel safe enough to tell her. We were at her apartment late at night after dinner and wine, and I found myself explaining the whole story. The medical account, Vanessa's accusation, my parents' silence. All of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and I braced myself for the doubt, the questions, the subtle suggestion that maybe I wasn't remembering things quite right. Instead, she said, "Your sister sounds like a sociopath." I actually laughed, surprised by the bluntness of it. "I don't know if she's a sociopath, I don't know what she is. She framed you for theft while your mother had cancer," Rachel said flatly. "And then she let you lose your entire family rather than tell the truth. That's not normal sibling rivalry, that's calculated cruelty." It was validating hearing someone be so unequivocally on my side. No questions about my memory or suggestions that maybe I misunderstood something. Just clear-eyed recognition that what had been done to me was wrong. We dated for 6 months, and they were good months. Rachel helped me see that what had happened to me was genuinely fucked up, that my anger was justified, that I wasn't crazy for still being hurt by it. She had this way of making me feel less alone in it all. She suggested elaborate revenge schemes sometimes, half-joking ideas about exposing Vanessa or somehow forcing my parents to see the truth. I'd laugh and play along, even though I knew I'd never actually do any of them. But it felt good to have someone who was angry on my behalf, who thought I deserved justice. Rachel also helped me understand something about myself that I hadn't fully recognized. "You're still waiting for them to come back," she said one night. "You're still organizing your life around the possibility that they'll realize they were wrong and want you back." "I'm not," I protested. "I've accepted that they're gone, have you?" she asked gently. Because you keep every card they send, you respond to their minimal contact, you haven't moved on, you've just put your life on pause. She was right, though I didn't want to admit it. I was still holding space for them, still keeping the door open just in case. Still hoping that somehow, someday, they'd come back to me. Rachel pushed me, in ways that were sometimes uncomfortable, but ultimately helpful, to actually build a life instead of just waiting in this liminal space. She encouraged me to make plans for holidays instead of dreading them. To build new traditions that were mine alone. To stop checking Vanessa's social media, stop torturing myself with images of the family I'd lost. You get to have a good life, she said. Even without them, especially without them, you get to be happy. We broke up eventually, not because of the family situation, but because we wanted different things long term. Rachel wanted to travel extensively, live abroad for a while, have adventures. And I realized I needed stability, roots, a sense of place. After everything I'd lost, I couldn't handle the idea of a relationship that was intentionally temporary or geographically uncertain. But those 6 months were important. They reminded me that I could still connect with people, still be vulnerable, still build something meaningful even with this unresolved trauma in my past. They taught me that being believed, being supported, being loved despite your damage, was possible. I moved to a new apartment, a nicer one in a different part of the city. It felt symbolic somehow, like I was physically moving away from the person I'd been before all of this happened. I decorated it the way I wanted, bought furniture that was mine and mine alone, created a space that had nothing to do with my family or my history with them. And slowly, gradually, I built a life. It wasn't the life I'd planned or expected. It didn't include the family I'd thought I'd always have. But it was mine, and it was real, and most days it was enough. I still thought about them, of course. I still wondered if my mother was healthy, if my father was doing okay, if Vanessa ever felt guilty about what she'd done. I still had moments where I'd see something that would remind me of them, a particular food or a song or a place, and I'd feel the loss all over again. But I also had moments where I didn't think about them at all. Where I was so engaged in my life, my work, my friendships, that entire days would pass without the shadow of their absence falling over me. Those moments became more frequent as time went on. I stopped checking Vanessa's social media. I stopped torturing myself with images of the family gatherings. I wasn't part of the happy photos that I'd been edited out of. What was the point? It only hurt me, and it changed nothing. 3 years and 2 months after the dinner, I got an email from my mother. It was short and formal. She wrote that she and my father had been talking, and they thought perhaps enough time had passed that we could try to reconnect. They suggested meeting for coffee, somewhere neutral, just to talk. I read that email probably 50 times. I analyzed every word, every phrase, looking for any acknowledgement that they'd been wrong, any apology for cutting me off. There was nothing. Just this bland suggestion that we reconnect, as if the past 3 years had been a mutual decision and natural drifting apart rather than a deliberate expulsion. I didn't respond immediately. I let it sit for a few days, then a week, then 2 weeks. I talked about it with my therapist, with my close friends. Everyone had different advice. Some thought I should go, that this was my chance to rebuild the relationship. Others thought I should refuse unless they were willing to actually acknowledge what they'd done. In the end, I wrote back. I said I appreciated them reaching out, but that I wasn't willing to meet unless we could first address what had actually happened. I wrote, as carefully and clearly as I could, that I had never taken that money, that I had been falsely accused, and that any reconciliation had to start with them acknowledging that possibility. I didn't expect them to immediately believe me. I wasn't naive enough to think one email would overturn 3 years of conviction. But I needed them to at least be willing to question their narrative, to look at the evidence again, to consider that maybe they'd been wrong. My father responded a week later. He said that he understood I still maintained my innocence, but that they couldn't have a productive conversation if I wasn't willing to take responsibility for what I'd done. He suggested that perhaps we should wait longer until I was ready to be honest with them and myself. The implication was clear. They were willing to let me back into the family, but only if I confessed to something I hadn't done. Only if I played the role of the repentant prodigal daughter, admitting my mistakes and asking for forgiveness. I didn't respond to that email. What was there to say? A few months later, I heard through a distant cousin that Vanessa had gotten engaged. The cousin didn't know about our estrangement, sent me a cheerful message about how exciting it was, asked if I was going to be in the wedding. I said congratulations and left it at that. The news hit me harder than I expected. Vanessa was moving forward with her life, reaching major milestones, building a future. And I was still stuck in the aftermath of what she'd done to me. It felt cosmically unfair that she got to be happy while I was still dealing with the consequences of her lie. I found myself wondering about her fiancé. Did he know what she'd done? Had she told him about the sister she'd framed, the family she'd helped tear apart? Or had she spun some other story, painted herself as the victim somehow, the sister who tried her best but had been pushed away by my guilt and denial? I wondered if he'd ever meet me, ever hear my side of things. Would he believe me if he did? Or would he be like David, looking for reasons to doubt, ways to explain away my story as self-deception or manipulation? More than anything, I wondered if Vanessa ever thought about me. If she felt any guilt when she looked at her engagement ring, when she made wedding plans, when she thought about the family gathering she was planning. Did she ever have a moment of conscience, a flash of awareness that her happiness was built on my devastation? I wondered if she'd invite me. Part of me almost hoped she would, just to see what level of delusion we were operating at. Did she really think I'd show up and smile and pretend everything was fine? Did she think I'd stand in her wedding party and celebrate her happiness while she destroyed my relationship with our family? The invitation never came. I learned about the wedding plans through social media, through mutual acquaintances, through the small-town network that kept me informed even when I didn't want to be. I heard about the venue she'd chosen, the colors, the date, all the details of her perfect day. I thought about showing up uninvited. Not to cause a scene, but just to be there, visible, undeniable. To force everyone to acknowledge what had happened, to confront them with the person they'd erased. But that was a fantasy, a revenge daydream that I knew I'd never actually act on. What would it accomplish besides making me look unstable? The day of the wedding, I stayed in my apartment. I didn't check social media, didn't look for photos, didn't torture myself with images of the celebration I wasn't part of. Instead, I went for a long run, took myself to a nice dinner, watched a movie I'd been meaning to see. I tried to treat it like any other Saturday. But that night, lying in bed, I couldn't help but imagine what the day had been like. Mom helping Vanessa get ready, doing her makeup or fixing her veil. Dad walking her down the aisle, his face proud and emotional. The reception, speeches about what a wonderful person Vanessa was, how happy everyone was for her. And through it all, no mention of me. No acknowledgement that anyone was missing. A few days later, photos started appearing. I broke my own rule and looked at them. Vanessa looked beautiful, radiant in her white dress. Our parents were in every frame, smiling, clearly involved in every aspect of the day. There were pictures of Vanessa with her bridesmaids, none of whom were me. Pictures of family groups, everyone accounted for except the one daughter who'd been edited out. I cried when I saw those photos, which surprised me. I thought I'd moved past this, thought I'd accepted the reality of the situation. But seeing them all together, celebrating without me, drove home the fact that I'd been completely replaced. The family had gone on without me, had continued to create memories and milestones, and I was just gone from all of it. But after that crying session, something else settled over me. A kind of finality. This was really how it was going to be. This was my reality. My sister had lied, my parents had believed her, and I'd been cast out. And none of them were going to suddenly realize the truth or come looking for me or apologize for what they'd done. They were building a life that didn't include me. They were creating new memories, new traditions, new family stories. And I wasn't part of any of it. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because Vanessa had been willing to sacrifice me to protect herself, and my parents had been willing to believe her. I had a choice then. I could spend the rest of my life bitter and angry, dwelling on the injustice of it all. Or I could accept it and move forward with the life I'd been building. I chose the latter. Not because I forgave them exactly. I'm not sure I'll ever forgive them for how easily they believed the worst of me, for how willing they were to cut me off without real evidence. But I chose to let go of the constant hope that it'd change their minds, the fantasy of vindication, the dream of one day being welcomed back. I am 34 years old. I have a career I'm good at, friends I trust, a life I've built piece by piece in the aftermath of being falsely accused. It's not the life I thought I'd have, but it's mine. I still don't talk to my family. My mother sends a card at Christmas, and I send one back, both of us maintaining this fiction of civility. But we don't call, don't visit, don't engage beyond these minimal gestures. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I still think about the dinner. I replay it in my mind, searching for the moment where I could have said something different, done something that would have changed the outcome. I think about Vanessa's tears, so convincing, and wonder how long she'd practiced them. I think about my parents' faces, the disappointment and hurt in their eyes, and wonder if they ever doubt their conviction. I think about the $7,000 too. Whether Vanessa ever paid it back quietly, or whether my parents just absorbed the loss. Whether she ever thinks about what she did, what it cost me, or whether she's so committed to her lie that she's actually convinced herself it was true. I'll probably never know the answers to these questions. And I've had to make peace with that. The truth matters, but sometimes truth alone isn't enough. Sometimes the story that people want to believe is more powerful than the reality. People ask me sometimes why I don't fight harder to clear my name, why I don't force a confrontation or demand answers. And I tell them that I did fight for months and it changed nothing. At some point, you have to decide whether you're going to spend your whole life fighting against someone else's narrative or whether you're going to focus on living your own truth. I chose to live my truth. I know I didn't steal that money. I know I was falsely accused. I know my sister lied and my parents believed her. Those facts are solid for me, even if they're not for anyone else. And sometimes that has to be enough. Living well, building a life, finding peace where you can. Not because the injustice doesn't matter, but because you can't let someone else's lie define your entire existence. The strange thing is, I don't hate Vanessa. I'm angry, yes. I'm hurt. I'm stunned by what she was willing to do to me. But hate feels too simple for something this complicated. She's still my sister. We still shared a childhood, a history, all those years before this happened. And in some strange way, I almost pity her. Because she has to live every day knowing what she did, maintaining a lie that big, looking at our parents and knowing they only love the version of me that she created, not the real one. That's her burden to carry, not mine. Mine is different. Mine is the absence. The empty chair at family gatherings, the missing phone calls, the stories I'll never hear, the moments I'll never share. The knowledge that I had a family and lost it, not through any fault of my own, but through circumstances I couldn't control. But I've learned something through all of this. You can lose everything you thought defined you and still survive. You can be falsely accused, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally and still build a life worth living. It's not easy. There are still days when I feel the weight of it all, when injustice feels fresh and raw. But those days are further apart now. I am not defined by what was done to me. I am not the story Vanessa told about me, or the daughter my parents think they lost. I am the person I've chosen to become in the aftermath, the life I've built from the wreckage. And some days, most days now, that's enough. I still miss them. I miss the mother I had before she got sick, before any of this happened. I miss my father's terrible jerks and the way he used to call me just to chat about nothing. I miss the sister I thought I had, the one who shared my childhood and my secrets. But I've stopped waiting for them to come back to me. I've stopped hoping for a phone call that will change everything, an apology that will undo the past 3 years. I've accepted that this is my reality now, and I've learned to find meaning and joy within it. People talk about closure like it's something clean and final, like there's a moment where everything resolves and you can move on completely. But I don't think that's real. I think closure is actually just the slow process of learning to live with unresolved things, of carrying your grief and anger and hurt without letting them consume you entirely. That's where I am now. Learning to carry it. Some days are heavier than others, but I'm learning. I'm surviving. I'm even occasionally happy. And maybe that's the best revenge of all. Not some dramatic confrontation or public vindication, but simply living well despite everything they did to me. Being successful, being loved, being whole even with this massive piece missing from my life. Vanessa took my family from me. But she didn't take everything. She didn't take my sense of self, my integrity, my ability to build meaningful connections with others. She didn't take my future. Those things are still mine. And I'm going to keep building on them, day by day, year by year, until the life I've created is so full and rich that the empty space where my family used to be becomes just one part of a much larger story. I don't know if I'll ever have contact with them again. Part of me hopes that someday, somehow, the truth will come out. That Vanessa will confess or slip up, or that my parents will find evidence that exonerates me. but I'm not counting on it. I'm not planning my life around that possibility anymore. Instead, I'm planning my life around the things I can control. My career, my friendships, my growth as a person. The ways I can contribute to the world, help others, find meaning and purpose outside of family relationships. It's not what I wanted, but it's what I have. And I'm learning, slowly, to make peace with that difference. If you're listening to this and you've been falsely accused of something, if you know what it's like to tell the truth and not be believed, I see you. I understand how isolating it is, how maddening, how it can shake your faith in everything you thought was solid. And I want you to know that you can survive it. It will change you, yes. It will leave scars. But you can build a life beyond it. The truth matters, but sometimes it matters most to yourself. Sometimes you have to be the one who believes in your own innocence, who knows your own worth, even when everyone else has decided otherwise. And that's hard. It's lonely. But it's also, in its own way, empowering. Because once you realize that you can't control what other people believe about you, you're free to focus on what's actually true. And to live according to that truth, regardless of who's watching or who's judging. That's where I am now. Living my truth. Building my life. Missing my family, but not letting that absence define me entirely. It's not a happy ending. But it's not an unhappy one either. It's just an ending that's still in progress, a story that's still being written, a life that's still unfolding in ways I never expected. And I'm okay with that. Most days I'm even grateful for it. Because if this hadn't happened, I might never have learned how strong I actually am. I might never have built this life that's wholly mine, independent of anyone else's approval or acceptance. So that's my story. The story of how my sister framed me, how my parents believed her, and how I survived the aftermath. It's not over yet. Maybe it never will be. But I'm here, I'm living, and I'm learning to find peace in the uncertainty. And if that's all I ever get, it will have to be enough. Thank you for listening. If this resonated with you, if you've lived through something similar or just needed to hear that survival is possible, I'm glad I could share this with you. Take care of yourself. Believe in your own truth. And remember that you're more than the worst thing anyone has ever accused you of, especially when that accusation is false. You're going to be okay. I promise. I'm proof of that.